My name is Anna. I'm standing in the middle of a narrow brick townhouse, the soft glow of candles casting a warm light on the mismatched glasses filled with wine. The air is filled with the aroma of roasted chicken and fresh bread from the corner bakery. Aunt Lily sits across from me, her eyes kind and understanding, as we share stories and laughter. But my mind keeps drifting back to that fateful dinner at my mother's house, a moment that changed everything. The dining room was bathed in the soft light of candles, their flames flickering against the polished wood of the table. Outside, the humid Miami evening pressed against the windows, carrying the faint scent of salt from the ocean. Plates clinked, laughter rippled across the table, and the low hum of conversation wrapped around me, but it felt like a distant echo. Mom moved gracefully between chairs, her hands steady as she placed thick cuts of steak in front of my sister Isabella, her husband Ethan, and their 2 children. She followed with a flourish, producing a box of imported Italian gelato, each scoop glistening under the chandelier. They were placed carefully, deliberately, as if arranging jewels. I watched every plate fill, every smile of gratitude, until at last there was nothing left for me but the cool shine of an empty charger. I glanced at my fork and knife, lined neatly, untouched. My grilled fish from the first course had already gone cold. My stomach tightened, but it wasn't hunger. It was something heavier, the weight of a role I had played too long. Across the table, Aunt Lily's brows knit together. She leaned forward, her voice cutting through the clamor. "Carol, didn't you prepare one for Anna?" Mom's smile was as light as her tone. "I only served for family." The words landed with the softness of silk and the cruelty of glass. A murmur passed around the table, forks pausing midair. Isabella smirked, her hand resting comfortably on Ethan's arm as if she had already won something I hadn't known was a contest. Heat flushed my face. My fingers curled under the table, nails pressing into my palm until I steadied them. I lifted my eyes to my mother, then to the sister who had been given everything I was denied. My voice trembled, but it carried. "Am I not family?" The clatter of dishes faded. Laughter stilled, and the only sound left was the hum of the chandelier above as the room sank into silence that no one seemed willing to break. It was in that silence that I felt the first thread of resolve begin to pull tight, connecting me back to where it all began. The silence at that dinner table took me back to another kind of silence, the one that filled our house after my father collapsed in the backyard when I was 16. A heart attack, sudden and merciless. One minute he was fixing the fence, the next he was gone, leaving my mother, my sister, and me adrift in a house that no longer felt steady. In the weeks that followed, bills piled on the counter like storm clouds. Mom's grief turned sharp, practical. "We'll manage," she told me, her voice flat, as if determination alone could stretch a widow's pension to cover everything. And we did manage because I picked up shifts after school at a small coffee shop on Collins Avenue while other kids studied for SATs or hung out at the beach. I was counting out cash drawers, learning how to make the perfect latte, and bringing home grocery money. Isabella, barely 14 then, was spared from all of it. Mom called her the baby, as though the years between us were oceans. Isabella kept her allowance, kept her afternoons free for dancing and singing, while I scrubbed coffee stains from my work apron and prayed the bus wouldn't be late again. By the time I turned 20, I enrolled at Miami-Dade College's business administration program. 2 nights a week, I sat under fluorescent lights studying accounting and marketing while balancing a full-time job in a small office. Isabella, meanwhile, got her acceptance letter to the Juilliard School of Performing Arts. Mom beamed, saying, "This is what your father would have wanted." She never said that when I showed her my community college ID, tuition, supplies, rent in Miami. Mom covered it all for Isabella, writing checks from the account I quietly supplemented with my own wages. Whenever I asked why things had to be so uneven, she'd sigh and rest her hand on mine. "Isabella needs more support. You're stronger, Anna." At the time, I clung to the words like they were praise. Maybe being strong was enough. But sitting at that dinner table years later with an empty plate, I finally began to wonder if strong had only ever been her excuse to give me less. Adulthood didn't change the balance. If anything, it sharpened the edges. Isabella married Ethan in a lavish wedding on the beach, the kind of Miami affair that filled the newspaper society pages. There were live bands, fresh flowers shipped in from South America, and champagne fountains that sparkled under the stars. Mom paid for nearly everything. She said it was tradition that fathers used to cover the costs, and since ours wasn't there, she would take on the role. I stood at the edge of the photographs in a dress I had bought secondhand and altered myself. My contribution was silent. I slipped out early from work every day that week to help arrange flowers and decorate the venue while my student loan statement sat unopened on my kitchen counter. Mom never asked about those. She only asked if Isabella was rested, if Ethan's family was impressed, if the colors looked right on the beach. When the wedding bills cleared, Isabella and Ethan moved into a newly built house in Coral Gables, part of a development that advertised luxury living. Mom helped with the down payment. I, meanwhile, stayed in my one-bedroom rental and chipped away at debt with every paycheck. By the time I finally sent in the last loan payment, no one noticed. Holidays followed the same script. Isabella's children opened expensive toys, designer clothes, and gift cards. Ethan unwrapped a high-end watch one Christmas, the kind with diamonds set in the face. I got a scented candle regifted. I realized when I saw a smudge of someone else's handwriting still faintly on the box. Mom brushed it off when I raised an eyebrow. Isabella has children now. She needs more, she said, as if that justified the imbalance. But more never seemed to stop. Every birthday, every Easter, every 4th of July cookout, it was always Isabella's family at the center with me orbiting on the outside. I told myself it was fine. That strength meant self-sufficiency. Yet each time I sat quietly while they compared gifts or vacations. A small voice inside asked how long strength was supposed to last without recognition. That voice followed me straight into the next holiday gathering. By the time Isabella's children were old enough to run through the hallways with sticky fingers, Mom had quietly reassigned me from guest to worker at every family gathering. At Thanksgiving, she would press an apron into my hands before I even had a chance to set down my purse. "You're so efficient in the kitchen. Anna, could you baste the turkey? Make sure the pies don't burn." At birthdays, I was handed balloons to tie, chairs to unfold, and Isabella's kids to chase while she and Ethan posed for photos. It wasn't just chores. It was expectation. I was supposed to anticipate needs before anyone asked, to clear plates, pour drinks, hush crying children, all while staying invisible enough not to disrupt the glow around my sister's family. One Christmas, after hours of cooking and wrapping, I sat down last at the tree while the others tore through piles of packages. Isabella gasped as she opened a velvet box from Mom, revealing a delicate necklace lined with sapphires. Ethan grinned, sliding the clasp shut around her wrist. My turn came with a paper bag and a mug inside, floral print chipped along the rim. A faint coffee stain marked the bottom. I remembered seeing the same mug on Mom's counter weeks earlier. Ethan laughed, tilting his glass toward me. "Anna, you should take notes. This is how family looks out for each other." His arm wrapped tightly around Isabella as if the joke were harmless. I forced a smile, but the heat rose in my throat. In that moment, the house didn't feel like the place I grew up, the place where Dad's voice once filled the kitchen on Sunday mornings. It felt like a stage where I had been cast as the servant in a play I hadn't auditioned for. Mom never looked at me with malice. She looked at me with practicality, as if it were natural I should hold the weight so Isabella could shine. "You're strong," she would remind me, but strength in her mouth sounded like a command rather than a comfort. That night, as I gathered empty wine glasses and wiped crumbs from the table, I realized that every holiday had turned into proof that strength meant service, and service meant silence. But silence only stretches so far before it breaks. The smell of seared steak lingered heavy in the room, mingling with the sweetness of the Italian gelato as they were unboxed like treasures. Mom's hands moved with the same deliberate grace I'd seen all my life, setting the plates before Isabella, Ethan, their children, and a few cousins who had come down from New York. Each plate gleamed with its own perfect cut, juices glistening under the chandelier. The desserts followed, each scoop placed carefully beside the steak as though presentation itself were proof of love. When Mom passed by me, her tray suddenly lighter, my place remained bare. The porcelain charger reflected the overhead light, mocking in its emptiness. My grilled fish, carved earlier and long gone cold, sat forgotten at the edge of the table. Aunt Lily's brow furrowed, her voice breaking the rhythm of chatter. "Carol, didn't you prepare one for Anna?" Mom turned, her smile soft, airy, as though she'd been caught in nothing at all. "I only served for family." The words slipped out so easily they might have been rehearsed. Around me, silverware paused. Isabella's lips curled into a smirk as she leaned forward, eyes glittering. "Don't be dramatic, Anna. You're fine with fish." My chest tightened, heat rising like a tide. I couldn't hold back. For years, I had swallowed the small humiliations, mugs regifted, chores assigned, glances that cut without words. But sitting there surrounded by laughter and the clink of wine glasses, I felt every slight collapse onto this single moment, sharp and unbearable. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs, steadying the tremor in my hands. My gaze fixed on Mom, who was already turning toward Isabella as if her performance were finished. The air seemed to thicken, a waiting silence pressing at my ribs. For the first time, I didn't lower my eyes. My voice broke the hush, steadier than I felt. "Am I not family?" The table froze. Forks hovered midair. Conversations dissolved into stillness. The chandelier hummed faintly above us, the only sound left in the room, while all eyes shifted toward me. The words I had never dared to say were suddenly alive, demanding an answer. No one rushed to fill the silence. Mom's smile wavered, caught between irritation and dismissal, but she didn't answer me. I let the quiet stretch until the weight of it pressed against the walls. My hands stopped trembling. My voice came clearer than I expected. "This isn't about steak or dessert," I said, though the untouched plate in front of me glared like evidence. "This is about the way I've been treated for years, like I don't belong at my own mother's table." A few relatives shifted in their seats. Ethan cleared his throat, but I kept going. Every holiday, every birthday, I'm the one cooking, cleaning, babysitting, while Isabella gets the gifts, the praise, the place at the center. I've been told I'm strong. But that was just another way of saying I didn't deserve care. Mom's lips tightened. "Anna, this isn't the time." "When was it ever the time?" I asked, leaning forward. "Was it the time you went through my drawers looking for something to criticize? Or when you reminded me I wasn't talented enough to join the family performance?" Aunt Lily's eyes flicked to Mom, searching. But Mom looked away. Isabella finally broke in with a laugh sharp enough to slice the air. "God, you sound so jealous. You've always been bitter that Mom gives me more." I turned toward her, steady. "Jealous of what? Dependence?" Her smile faltered. I didn't stop. "You live off handouts, Mom's money, Ethan's promises, and you think that makes you enviable?" "I've carried myself without expecting anyone else to foot my bills." "I don't envy you, Isabella. I pity you." Gasps scattered down the table. Isabella's face flushed red. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, and Mom's knuckles whitened against her wine glass. For the first time, the words I had buried for years weren't locked inside me. They were out, burning through the air, and there was no taking them back. Isabella's eyes darted away. But I didn't let the moment slip. "You call me jealous," I said, my voice steady. "But I know the truth about your perfect little family." A murmur passed through the table. Isabella straightened defensively. "What are you talking about?" I folded my hands in my lap, though my pulse hammered. "I know about the mortgage you're months behind on. I know about the credit cards maxed out in Ethan's name. And I know Mom has been covering your bills quietly, funneling money so you can keep up appearances. Gasps rippled down the table. Forks clattered. Ethan's face drained of color. Mom's cheeks flushed crimson, her composure cracking. That's not for dinner conversation, she snapped, her voice sharp with panic. I only wanted to protect Isabella's children. They shouldn't suffer because their parents are struggling. I leaned forward, my voice cutting through hers. You've starved one daughter of love to feed the other with lies. You call it protection, but it's favoritism dressed up as sacrifice. Isabella slammed her hand against the table, silverware rattling. You're just bitter. You never had a family of your own. No husband, no children. That's why you're so eager to tear mine apart. The sting was real, but it didn't land the way she wanted. I met her glare, calm. Better no family than a cage built from shame. Her jaw dropped. Words caught in her throat. Around us, the room quivered in silence, the spell of superiority that had long shielded her cracking under the weight of exposed truth. Mom clutched her napkin, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Ethan stared at his plate as though answers might be carved into the china. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking at the table. I was the one forcing everyone else to see what had been hiding in plain sight. And that shift left the air sharp, charged, impossible to ignore. As I prepared to take my stand, I pushed my chair back, the scrape of wood against wood cutting through the suffocating quiet. My napkin fell to the floor. A small white flag I had no intention of picking up. Slowly, I reached for my bag, sliding the strap over my shoulder as if I were simply excusing myself from an ordinary dinner. But nothing about this moment was ordinary. I'm done, I said, my voice low but firm. I've been half a daughter my entire life, and I won't play that part anymore. Isabella let out a sharp laugh, the sound brittle. Oh, please. You're being dramatic again. Before I could reply, Aunt Lily rose from her chair. Her presence was quiet but commanding, her eyes fixed on Mom. Carol, this was cruel. You humiliated her in front of all of us. The room shifted. A few cousins exchanged uneasy glances, some nodding, their silence finally breaking into murmurs of agreement. The weight of their support settled on me like a cloak I hadn't realized I was allowed to wear. Mom sat frozen, her stare pinned to me as though willing me to back down. Isabella sneered, her lip curling, but it only made her look smaller. I straightened, lifting my chin. If I'm not family, then stop expecting me to play the role you've written for me. You can't have it both ways. Not anymore. The words hung heavy in the air. No one moved to stop me as I stepped away from the table. The echo of my heels clicked against the hardwood floor, sharp and final. Behind me, chairs creaked. Silverware trembled, but no voice called me back. I walked through the archway into the hall, past the framed photos where Isabella smiled from every corner, and I stood blurred at the edges. The front door loomed ahead, its brass handle warm beneath my palm. As I pulled it open, the humid Miami night rushed in, carrying me out into the dark, where my own silence finally belonged to me. In the days that followed, the phone calls began. At first, I let them ring unanswered, the sound too tightly wound to my raw nerves. But eventually, I picked up. One cousin, her voice hushed, said she admired me for saying what everyone else had noticed, but never dared to name. Another apologized for sitting silent while Mom drew the line in front of me. Their words didn't erase the sting of that night, but they softened the edges. Aunt Lily called on Saturday, steady as always. Come to my place for Sunday dinner, she said. Family is who respects you at the table, not who denies you a plate. Her words settled in me like an anchor, something sure in the shifting tide. Mom's message came later. Short and cold. You embarrassed me. Don't expect an apology. It carried the same clipped tone she used when bills were late after Dad died. The tone that meant nothing would move her. Isabella predictably took to social media. Her post about jealous siblings drew sympathetic comments from her friends, a carefully staged photo of her children in matching outfits attached. I scrolled past it without pause. She could keep her stage. I had stepped off mine. At night, when the house was quiet, I replayed the dinner in my mind, the clatter of my chair, Aunt Lily's voice, the hush that followed my words. For years, I'd feared speaking would break me. Instead, it had broken something else, the illusion that silence was survival. I began to realize that shame no longer sat with me. It sat with those who had stayed quiet while I was erased, and it was theirs to carry.